Within the night, the indiscernible shadow of a woman appeared and motionlessly stood by Conrad's side. For an hour, she did nothing but stare at him, before vanishing as silently as she had appeared. The sunrays spreading within the sky marked the end of the night, the first full sleep night Conrad had experienced since his arrival in this world. He stood up, asked for his two goons to handle his shift and shot toward the marketplace. The inner court marketplace was a bustling location that rose and slept alongside the sun. It was mostly run by eunuchs who traded goods and services in exchange for coins or items of value. The only things not sold were weapons, for those were forbidden by palace laws. Palace maids and eunuchs alike were welcomed as customers. Palace maids, however, were not allowed to do business here. This was the eunuch's turf. Conrad stepped into a pill shop and exchanged 1 purple crystal for 2 high-grade True Spirit Restoration pills as well as 600 red crystals of change, then returned to his shift. I have been meaning to ask. You said all the influential races of this world possess some kind of natural aura, while powerful cultivators also possess preternatural presences. Right? Yes. That being the case, why did the previous body's owner not feel anything special from the Holy Consort? Although Conrad had never met her, he still held the memories of his predecessor. But from those memories, he couldn't sense any extraordinariness from the Holy Consort. And although outstanding, her beauty definitely wasn't enough to be dubbed as the country's #1. And what makes you think that the one he met was the Holy Consort? Indifferently asked the system. Would anyone dare usurp her appearance in her quarters? That I do not know. But what I do know is that the highest-ranking members of the imperial family, such as the Holy Emperor, the Holy Empress, and the Holy Consort, are all saints. There are ways to hide the bloodline aura, but the natural presence and pressure brought by cultivation cannot be hidden. And theirs can force any mortal to his knees. The rest of the day was uneventful. And upon finishing his shift, Conrad cloaked his face and directly strode toward the eunuch he had hidden earlier. HM. The eunuch struggled through muffled screams, but there was no one to come to his aid. If left unattended to, it was not impossible for him to die of starvation or thirst before someone discovered him. Conrad once again knocked him out, then untied his bindings and tossed the stolen identity token back toward him. That settled, he changed his appearance to that of an ordinary youth and stepped toward Ileana's embroidery pavilion. Climbing the walls, he sneaked in, moved toward her private quarters and light steps, and dived in. She was sitting on her bed with her legs stretched and her back resting against her pillow to read a book when the sound of footsteps reached her ears, and the unknown man dived in. But considering timing and the disguise which was obvious to her eyes, she reckoned it was her brazen eunuch suitor. "You're here," she coolly stated, once more ignoring his impoliteness. "I am indeed. Are you ready to go on a date?" Conrad inquired while gliding toward her in silent steps. "If you can hold up to your end of the bargain." A winning smile was painted on Conrad's lips as he pulled out a bottle containing 2 nail-sized sky blue pellets. Upon seeing them, Ileana's eyes lit up, and she almost struck out to snatch it from his hands but resisted the temptation. Without a word, she stood up and walked toward her wardrobe. "Are you also dissolute enough to stand there as I change my clothes?" "I am dissolute enough. I'm even dissolute enough to help you change." Seeing her silky green hairs cascading below her waist, Conrad inwardly cursed the palace customs that prevented her from releasing them during the day. "Why dash? I will be waiting by the stream." But Conrad didn't wait for her to snap and left. He moved past the doors, exited the residence, and walked toward the stream. Watching the undulating waves, he stood there with his arms clasped beneath his back. He would not have to idle for long to see her form appearing by his side. She was dressed in the same format of the close-fitting cyan robe, but her hairs were unbound, fluttering at her back without restraints. Within her hands, she held a brown lyre which she carried with apparent affection. "The lyre is my family's ancestral instrument. I learned to play it from my father at an early age. Allow me to play you a tune." Conrad nodded and sat at the edge of the stream. She did the same, adjusted the lyre within her grasp, and began playing. The methodical brush of her fingers against the strings created a soothing melody whose notes snatched Conrad from the woes of the world. Yet, as those notes went beyond his ears and strode toward his heart, Conrad could sense the melancholy hidden within them. It was a form of yearning, yearning for distant memories, yearning for those moments she didn't know to cherish in times now past. Yearning for the love and protection of elders once taken for granted. Yearning for the simplest of pleasures now forever beyond her grasp. Yearning for that moon hanging in the sky, whose watchful eyes enlightened her in the dark of night, revealing her dreams, simple, yet unattainable. The melody carried on, and Conrad lost tracks of time. His eyes had moved from the strings to stare into Ileana's as he sought an understanding of her through the notes she played. Then she stopped, her misty eyes moving from the lyre to stare back at him. "How would you title this?" she asked without much expectations. "As I yearn for regrets under the waning moon." Simple yet grabbed the essence of the tune. "I didn't think you would have an ear for music." "I don't. I have an ear for a woman's woes," he honestly replied and laid onto the ground with his head resting on her lap. "Are you not afraid of me pushing you into the stream? Have you forgotten? You said it yourself, I'm stupid." She considered slamming the lyre on his face but advised against it and chose to set it aside. "What do you really want from me?" Conrad wanted to say that adding her to his harem was imperative to keep his balls but advised against it. "I want you to be mine in body and soul. To possess and own you, from this day until you draw your last. That in life, you belong to me. And that in death, your ghost still belongs to me." The overbearingness within his words took her by surprise. She had not expected that youth's level of boldness to reach such heights. "Are you qualified to say such words? Let's not even consider your cultivation that is still far from the true knight rank. Let's not even consider your status that is likely to be of common origin. As long as I wear the dress of a palace maid, beside the emperor, any man that extends his hands toward me is punishable by death. Or do you think that I would be interested in a common tryst?" She had not lain. All the females of the inner court belonged to the holy emperor. Only the holy emperor could grant them to those of his liking, and while it was not rare for them to be used as political tools, any man caught getting too close without permission would face a brutal ending. But Conrad didn't care. Because he had already decided that since he was given the unique opportunity of reincarnation, the entire world would belong to him. The beauties of this world didn't need emperors. They only needed Conrad. You want more than a tryst. You want someone to sweep you off your feet and in broad daylight carry you out in the open for all to see. Someone who dares brazenly take your lips. Someone to hold the sky when it threatens to collapse. Someone like me. And before she could say anything else, his lips flew toward hers. She knew him bold but had not expected his boldness to reach such heights. Unruly. His overbearing kiss pushed her into his arms, and together they fell onto the ground. But in the distance, the floating shadow of a woman observed that scene with a frown. The shadow vanished, and in an abnormal timing, dozens of arrows flew from behind the nearby trees and shot toward the kissing pair. The whistle of arrows streaking through the air divided the pair in a heartbeat. Ileana was the first to sense the danger. Using her arm strength of nearly 2,000 kilos, she pushed Conrad into the air and somersaulted to avoid the incoming bolts. They flew past the area she previously laid in and lodged into the distance. "What's the meaning of this? Why didn't you warn me?" An outraged Conrad asked the system. About that, I can only warn you against malicious intent aimed at you, and you're not the target. Son of a bitch." But Conrad didn't have any time to waste on the unreliable system as 10 figures flew from the shadows and shot toward Ileana. By the time they landed back on the ground, the 10 figures had surrounded them. The moon flashed, revealing 10 masked forms whose only discernible characteristics were the bodies that made their genders evident and the cultivation base that rippled from them. As the duo's eyes swept them, they were alarmed. Ileana, in particular, couldn't believe her eyes, for she could clearly see details that Conrad couldn't. 6 high-level true knights. 3 mid-level true priests. 1 grand knight. Such a formidable lineup was enough to shred anyone below the grand rank in a heartbeat. And such a formidable lineup was aimed at her. Could it be? But distraction wasn't permitted, so Ileana cast her thoughts aside and focused on the incoming onslaught. It didn't come. Instead, the leader, a tall masked woman with an overbearing aura that carried one's gaze away from her engrossing curves, switched her attention to Conrad. "You can leave." The words were simple and looked amiable, but they carried a forceful power that commanded obedience. Conrad was perplexed. It was common sense to dispose of witnesses when conducting assassinations. Why then was that woman allowing him to leave? Was it because of his otherworldly charm and fantastic bearing? Nah. The woman's words had a drastic effect on Ileana. Her eyes grew cold, and any goodwill she might have felt toward Conrad instantly turned into rancor. Seeing that, Conrad was annoyed but couldn't blame her. To say nothing of her, even he was finding the situation incomprehensible. To any bystander, it would look like Conrad had been tasked with distracting her for the assassins to strike. His next words, however, replaced her growing resentment by a tinge of warmth. "After I shove my cock down your throat. Break his legs." The Grand Knight assassin roared, and in tandem, the 6 high-level true knights she commanded shot toward the duo. At their back, the remaining 3 mid-level true priests conjured scalding jets of pure white flames that rushed toward Ileana. Energy sword. Ileana extended her right hand, and dazzling blue light gathered within to morph into a dark blue longsword. Both knights and priests cultivated spiritual energy. But knights would use that energy to refine their bodies, while priests would use it to empower their minds. And although true knights and above could transform their spiritual energy into weapons of all kinds and shapes, they often chose swords. Dark blue sword aura swirled around Ileana, and despite the odds clearly being stacked against her, she was unafraid. With a sword stroke, she divided the flames rushing toward her. At that time, Conrad's voice echoed. "True suppression bead." Conrad tossed the purple bead into the air, and it released 6 purple glyphs that slammed into the incoming true knights' foreheads. Instantly, the energy weapons they had summoned vanished into thin air, and their cultivation base was sealed by the glowing glyphs. What the hell is going on? My cultivation? The 6 assassins crashed onto the ground and were now no different from mortals. The brutal change took all the gathered warriors aback. And using the element of surprise, Conrad pounced onto the crippled knights with bared claws. Crack! He grabbed 2 by the throat and wrenched their necks before tossing them onto the ground like heaps of trash. But by now, the gathered warriors and priests had snapped out of their torpor. Hateful! The Grand Knight woman scolded while sky-blue energy waves burst from her form. She condensed an energy broadsword and shot toward Conrad. But at that time, Ileana struck. Her sword drew an ordinary arc, and blinding sword aura shot in a half-moon shape and beheaded the remaining 4 knights. Afterward, she stomped her foot and barreled into the Grand Knight with a diagonal slash. Clang! The Grand Knight received her with a rightward sweep of her broadsword, and their weapons met in a metallic clash. In a flash, the assassins had lost more than half their numbers. But the situation still wasn't optimistic. The 3 true priests resumed casting their spells and fired flame arrows at Conrad. System: exchange 1000 EXP for a low-grade true rank shield. Alrighty. The system completed the exchange, and a bronze shield appeared within Conrad's hands. Without hesitation, he directed it toward the incoming flame arrows and stopped their onslaught. His cold eyes then swept the scene, and his face contorted into a frown. Ileana was currently being pushed back by the Grand Knight, whose sword strokes suppressed hers in every way. Meanwhile, the 3 true priests resumed casting spells to assail Conrad. Of the still breathing people, all were females. But their cultivations were too high for Conrad to take great advantage of that. Only Ileana could tip the scales. Is there a way to control who is targeted by my aura? You can do it with your spiritual power. But with your current level, it will be exhausting. Without hesitation, he released the full power of his half-incubus aura and used his spiritual power to direct the formless force toward the 4 female enemies. Immediately, they staggered. The spellcasting was interrupted, and the Grand Knight lost her balance. Although she didn't know what was going on, Ileana didn't let go of the opportunity and drove her sword toward the Grand Knight's heart. Energy armor! She roared, and the sky blue light swirling around her body turned into a blue battle armor that coated her entire body and repelled the sword strike. The energy armor was the privilege of Grand Knights and drastically increased their defensive abilities. Bang! An overbearing cleave sent Ileana flying backward with internal damage that caused her to spurt blood. Conrad caught her mid-flight while increasing the pressure on the 4 opponents. Droplets of sweat began streaking down his cheeks at breakneck speed as he felt his strength declining by the second. "It's you again. Damn degenerate." The Grand Knight spat. If it weren't because her orders forbade her from killing him, she would have already sliced him in two. She didn't know what kind of disgraceful ability he was using that caused her entire body to burn with unholy desires and her nether regions to get moister by the second. At her back, the 3 true priests were struggling to keep her bodies under control and didn't have the time to fire more spells. Ileana was puzzled. What kind of ability was that eunuch using to cause such damage? Degenerate? Aren't you the one struggling with a cock-craving body? What right do you have to call me degenerate? But never mind. I really am a degenerate. A degenerate that's going to fuck you bloody. Conrad retorted with a complacent smile, and Ileana, who was readjusting herself, couldn't help but stare at him with eyes open wide. Was there nothing he dared not say? Truly incomparably shameless. What Conrad had not expected was that his words had triggered a violent reaction within the Grand Knight. "I will kill you." Initially, she didn't dare disobey. But in a fit of fury, the sound part of her mind was thrown out of the window, and she charged him with naked killing intent. Careful! Conrad pushed Ileana to the side and brandished his shield to resist the incoming blow. Bang! The broadsword smashed the shield into debris, and the impact sent Conrad spiraling into the air while spurting a large mouthful of blood. With that single blow, his internal organs had suffered severe damage. And although his body regeneration ability kicked in, it wasn't fast enough to repair them in time for what was to come. The Grand Knight swept her broadsword toward Conrad's neck, but Ileana slammed it away with a full-force blow. Due to Conrad's half-incubus aura, the Grand Knight had been significantly weakened and was no longer much stronger than her. But with her energy armor still standing, Ileana couldn't obtain any advantage. The blow threw the Grand Knight off balance. She leaned her body weight onto her left leg and struck Ileana's chest with a violent kick. Ileana was sent rolling by Conrad's side with more blood dripping from her chest. "I didn't think that our date would turn into an episode of Bloody Valentine." Conrad jested with a bloodied smile. But although she didn't know what he meant by Bloody Valentine, she still returned his smile. "Do you regret chasing me now?" Regret is not a word of my vocabulary, and I always thought that if I was to die, it should be by the side of a beauty. And unbeknown to her, Ileana began finding that brazen eunuch rather interesting. "Give me your life." The Grand Knight drove her sword into a frontal thrust, aimed at Conrad's heart. With her last bits of strength, Ileana somersaulted to send a kick into the blade's blunt edge, hoping to throw it off their assailant's grasp. But to no avail. The sword pierced through Conrad's chest and his blood gushed forth. "Is this how my life ends?" Conrad wondered as all strength left him and his body succumbed to the sword stroke. But thanks to Ileana's last-ditch effort, the blow missed his heart. "No. I am unwilling." Conrad's trembling hands grasped the sword within his chest, and he fought to pull it out. "I cannot die, not like this. Not again." His blood boiled, and his entire shook, driven solely by the power of his will. And as if to echo his words, violet flames burned within his eyes. "Only I can step on the world cannot step on me. Get lost." He roared, and his entire body was set ablaze by violet flames that pushed out the broadsword and sent the Grand Knight reeling. The gaping wound she had left within his chest was mended in a heartbeat, and Conrad stood with his body coated in the violet flames. Within his chest, 3 energy sources he didn't know he possessed were being absorbed by his body and increasing his cultivation at breakneck speed. Second step, Adept Knight. Third step. Fourth step. Only when he reached the 5th step, Adept Knight level, were the sources of energy fully digested. Those energy sources were the primal essences of the 3 girls Conrad had deflowered. Incubi fed and grew on sexual energy and could innately absorb the primal essence of virgin girls to bolster their powers. Unbeknown to him, Conrad had collected the 3 primal essences. But because his bloodline had yet to truly activate, he couldn't sense or digest them. Bam! The Grand Knight slammed into the ground, and when her gaze returned on Conrad, it held nothing besides pure, unconstrained dread. How can this be? You are a demon? Without a shred of doubt, the energy signature within those flames was of demonic origin. Not only was the Grand Knight woman horrified, but Ileana's eyes were also full of terror. Within the Holy Continent, demonism was a forbidden practice punished by death, and demons of all kinds held the status of kill on sight. Across the 100,000 years long history of the Holy Flame Empire, there had been countless witch hunts and exterminations of people related to demons in any way conceivable. Possessing demonic blood was a surefire road to hell. How can he be of demonic blood? One of the main reasons why demons were so reviled, beside the teachings of the Holy Flame Church, was that they were innately driven to acts of sin and depravity. Regardless of the demonic bloodline, there was always one defining deadly sin that could be used to represent them. Lust for incubi, wrath for asuras, greed for druids, gluttony for vampires, etc. Most creatures of the Holy Continent considered them to be harbingers of calamities, and she was no exception. But thinking of Conrad's words, and how he bravely stood by her side against impossible odds, she couldn't find the strength to scorn him. Conrad's body bathed in swirling violet flames while pink-colored fog erupted from his pores and spread through the atmosphere. That pink fog carried with it the scent of orchids and in a heartbeat, indiscriminately invaded the gathered females. Ileana, who had been up until now the only one not targeted by Conrad's powers, was finding herself overtaken by rising fires and hidden desires. The fantasies she kept deep within her heart crept on the surface and clouded her vision. The others were not better off. They had been targeted by Conrad from the very beginning, and now, the pressure had risen to a monstrous level. The 3 true priestesses collapsed in a loud thud, their eyes shining with a pinkish glow while they moaned and frantically rubbed their inner thighs. Their bodies were set ablaze by an abundance of nefarious fires, and within their eyes, engrossing worlds of fantasies were being drawn. The Grand Knight woman who directly faced Conrad's abilities suffered the most. Although her cultivation was leagues above the rest, she had always been short-tempered. A disposition that made her more vulnerable to Conrad's pink fog. Thud. She struggled to stand up only to fall on her knees. Sweat dripped from her forehead as she tried to resist the demonic power's effects on her body. But it was to no avail. Her body burned, her cheeks were flushed red, and she quivered on her knees while her own fantasies turned against her. Me, less. The difficulty with which she spoke was apparent for all to see. Conrad stretched his right hand, causing purple flames to gush from his palm and soar toward her. The fire engulfed her but didn't sear her body. Instead, it obliterated her energy armor, sealed her cultivation, ruined her clothes, and caused the desires she was suppressing to erupt. Her eyes rolled back, her inner thighs were drenched by her squirting juice, and she fell onto her back with an ear-splitting moan. But Conrad wasn't done with her. He stepped toward her, and with her mask now gone, her face was available for him to appraise. And it indeed was praiseworthy. She had midlong vermilion hairs that stopped below her neck, and golden eyes that would in normal days glitter with ferocity but now glazed with lust. Still, there was defiance in there. Her eyelashes, her nose, her long legs, and voluptuous curves, everything about her was perfect. Everything about her rippled with an indomitable spirit that was collapsing at fast pace. Seeing Conrad stand so close to her, defiance, dread, and lust intermingled within her golden eyes. But when his rod rose to attention and tore an opening through his pants, lust began suppressing the rest. The golden, holy light swirling around it contrasted with its massive girth and sinful nature. A contrast that made it look captivating. She tried to resist the enticement, but it was growing by the second, and her pussy had already turned into a greedy fountain. The three true priestesses at her back were lost in furious masturbation, but when they witnessed the rod, they snapped out of their trance and instinctively crawled toward it with hunger and deference. But although they wanted to seize it and shove it down their pussies, Conrad's overpowering presence controlled even their most carnal desires. If he didn't call for them, they could only stare, and in silence crave him. "What's your name?" "Freya." She initially didn't want to answer, but as she stared at his violet eyes, all resistance faded in the oblivion. The compulsion they provoked was too strong. She had to obey. And unbeknown to her, she was rubbing her inner thighs from expectation. Conrad's hand flickered upward, causing a surge of telekinetic power to lift Freya from the ground and pull her toward him. She floated 9 inches above the ground with her cantaloupe-sized breasts pressed against his chest, his scalding shaft on her leg, and her craving eyes peering into his compelling gaze. Her heart spiraled out of control, beating at an alarming rate and causing her breathing to grow more pronounced. Her cheeks were flushed by an incarnadine red. Conrad's disguise fell, revealing his Adonis figure to the gathered beauties. And if his gaze was previously compelling, it was now irresistible. "What should I do with you?" Hearing that sultry voice snake into her ears, Freya's last bastion of defense crumbled. Punish me," she whispered. "I didn't hear you." "Punish me." Louder. "Punish me." Every time she answered, her juice dripped stronger, her body burned harder, and her breathing grew more ragged with a sense of freedom flooding her mind. The thought that he was her savior, that his rod would free her of all her shackles was quickly being imprinted within her mind. "Spread your legs." She obeyed, revealing the wet mess her sex had become. "That eager?" Conrad's lips curled into a devilish smile, and he grabbed her pussy within his left hand. First caressing it from bottom to top, then inserting his index. "MHM." She moaned, feeling a jolt of electricity spreading through her body. Conrad's index poked around, teasing and pleasuring her in ways she didn't know existed, then he inserted his middle finger and increased the pace. "Oh." Her moaning intensified, and she became more active, bringing his hand deeper into her fold, and practically fucking herself on it. But then he stopped, pulled his hand out of her, and patted her cheek with his drenched palm. "What is it that you want? Tell me." Desperation overtook her gaze, which went back and forth between Conrad's eyes and the scalding shaft that pressed her leg. "I want you to fuck me." "Louder," commanded Conrad while lifting her right leg. "I want you to fuck me. To make a mess of my insides, to paint my walls white with your sperm, to mark every inch of my body with your cock," she roared. And Conrad obliged, driving his cock into her vagina with one clean stroke. Ah! She bit her lower lip, but as expected, she was no virgin, and her pussy greedily sucked him in. Golden light spread within her insides, heightening her sensitivity by 100 folds while Conrad raised her left leg and held her in suspension by her firm buttocks. He gave her walls a second to appreciate and adjust around his shaft, then started pounding. Pa pa pa. His cock drove into her like a car on an empty highway, finding and conquering her sweet spots while hitting places she didn't know could be hit. His waist danced in serpentine arcs that sent his cock wreaking blissful havoc within her insides, while her gasps and moans entangled in a furious display of pleasure. Oh, yes, yes. She didn't need to guide, she didn't need to direct, she only needed to moan, 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 and moan. To lose herself in the pleasure only he could offer her. "Master, yes, master, you're so good. Heaven, this is heaven." Conrad took her lips into his, silencing her in muffled moans while his cock and balls slammed into her and hammered scalding, electrifying pleasure into their bodies. Then he flipped her onto her right leg, while still holding her by her left in a scissor-like position and bending her in an impossible arc to keep her lips into his. Pa pa pa. The pounding resumed, with Conrad's cock hitting and creating new pleasure spots for Freya to drown in. Unbeknown to her, however, with each thrust and moment of kissing, her hard-earned cultivation leaked from her body and slipped into his. Like a true sex demon, Conrad devoured her essence while instilling soul-consuming pleasure into her body and turning her into a slave of his carnal powers. The position once again changed, with Freya now standing on her hands and drawing an acute angle with the ground while Conrad held her by the waist and shagged her from behind. Pa pa pa. After the umpteenth orgasm, Freya completely abandoned herself to Conrad's clutches. Her hands gave in, and to avoid her dropping, Conrad reverted her into her initial position with one hand holding her waist and the other pressed on her back to maintain her in balance and took her until his cock trembled to announce its release. Coming, again. Arg! He groaned, releasing his warm cum inside her vagina, and painting her walls in a purple shaded white. Did I die? Is this paradise? Her eyes had rolled back, her lips contorted into a silly smile, and her cultivation had shrunken from the second step grand night to first step true night, but she was happy. But Conrad didn't stop there, and immediately grabbed the three priestesses whose masks and clothes had long since fallen onto the ground, split them onto his cock, and drew them into a demonic world of pleasure ruled by none other than him. Pa pa pa. Master, oh yes, my master. Pa pa pa. Take me. Defile me. Pa pa pa. I died, or am I dying? Their bodies writhed and intertwined with his in wondrous positions in bouts of ecstasy, and their cultivations dropped at breakneck speed, going from the middle of the true priest rank to the first step adept knight. But as the final wave of orgasm overtook them and each received copious jets of his purple-shaded semen within their pussies, they had no complaints, because they were happy. Meanwhile, Conrad's martial and spiritual cultivations were soaring. 6th step adept knight. 7th, 8th, 9th. First step true knight, 2nd, 3rd, all the way to 8th step true knight. As for his spiritual cultivation, it went from the 9th step initiate priest to 1st step true priest before stabilizing. But it wasn't over. Host. Congratulations for completing the 2nd level of the main quest. Reward time. Host's martial cultivation is increased to 4th step grand knight. Host gains the ability Ecstasy Cloud. Host's spiritual cultivation is increased to 6th step true priest. Host obtains the rank of harem builder. Host can choose one grand level cultivation method in physique. Harem rings distribution. Vast blue streams of energy spread within Conrad's body and merged with the yellow tower. Its color was altered, becoming the same sky blue, while his mind was also flooded by blue waves of energy that coalesced into a dark blue spring. His arm strength had risen to more than 3,000 kilos, while his bodily speed had surpassed that of sound. But he wasn't satisfied. There was a significant problem in his cultivation. It had risen too fast and without the help of a cultivation method. While the cultivation boosts given by the system were flawless, the same could not be said for the energy he harvested from his assailants. A suitable cultivation method was needed to purify the flaws and enhance his strength. But that was something to be dealt with at a later time. Conrad turned heels and stepped toward Ileana, who had already shredded her clothes to play with her drenched sex. But although her naked body laid bare for him to contemplate, and she was at her most vulnerable state, Conrad didn't intend to take advantage of her. He made a grasping motion, and the pink fog that had invaded her body and threw her into such disarray exited through her pores and disappeared within Conrad's palm. With its consuming effects gone, she quickly regained lucidity. Why not take her on the spot? She deserves a better first time. Something that truly fulfills her fantasies. That's what I will give her. Conrad replied to the system's inquiry. By the way, you're not initializing the 3rd level of the main quest? Oh, about that, the happiness god reckoned you should be given a break every now and then, so every 2 levels, you get a vacation. Oh? But after you claim your reward, I'm going to undergo a 1-week update to bring you new features, so you won't be able to count on me during that time. Conrad wanted to say that the system was in any case too unreliable, but opted to just focus on Ileana, who was slowly adjusting to the scenery. Her slit eyes had avoided Conrad to stare at the 4 women that now laid bare on the ground with semen oozing from their vaginas, drool dripping from their lips, and rolled back eyes that made them look brain damaged. The scene was terrifying, to say the least, and in comparison, her own nakedness and disgraceful behavior appeared too trivial. Are you afraid of me? It was a rhetorical question. With Conrad's demonic blood fully awakened and overpowering his human bloodline, Conrad was now more beast than man and could sense the fear emanating from her body. The sound of his voice sent a shiver down her spine. She was terrified. Slowly, she forced herself to return her gaze onto him and meet him eye to eye. Conrad stretched his hand toward her and clicked his fingers, causing purple light to enshroud and reform her torn clothes. She said nothing, picked up the garments and got dressed in less than a minute, then turned back toward him. Is this your real appearance? She asked while staring at that perfectly chiseled face and glittering violet eyes. So, it seems. The flames slipped through Conrad's pores and returned into his body, causing his eyes to revert to their usual black color. The only trace left of his transformation was a purple flame-shaped mark that was now visible on his right arm. But even without all the supernatural display, his presence was captivating. Thanks to his new cultivation level and bloodline sublimation, his natural charm had risen to inhuman heights, causing Ileana to only find him more dreadful. Subconsciously, she stepped back. But then the sight of him standing up and almost dying for her to face the deadly crisis together resurfaced, and she stepped back toward him. Don't you always have something to say? Why are you not saying anything? You want me to lie. I don't want to. He was right. Ileana wanted him to say that there was a rational explanation to all of this, that she was mistaken, maybe that he had cultivated some kind of eldritch power that gave him demon-like abilities. Anything, except that he truly was of demonic blood. But he wouldn't. And strangely, those words soothed some of her fears. You clearly are a womanizer. Don't you people deceive women on a daily basis? Why the restraint? She had not realized it yet, but she was steadily getting more comfortable. You deceive a woman you just want to sleep with. I've said it before, I don't merely want to sleep with you. I want to own you, body and soul. The ease with which she spoke made it sound like the most natural of things, but to her, it felt like she had been marked by a great beast for a hunt she could not escape from. Who are you? Why did you infiltrate the Imperial Palace? Ileana's eyesight and knowledge were good enough to spot some things Conrad himself wasn't aware of. Half-demons were generally much inferior to pure-blooded demons due to the impurities of their bloodlines. However, she had no doubt that Conrad's innate demonic powers were far beyond the league of the average pure-blood incubus. This could only mean one thing. His demonic parent was, without a shred of doubt, a terrifying existence. In all honesty, I was sold to the palace by my parents and used to be a eunuch until recently. It hasn't been long since my demonic powers awakened, so I truly do not possess the answer to your questions and fears. Conrad replied with his eyes staring directly into hers, and she could find no trace of lies within. Is being of demonic that bad? Bad? It seems you don't have a clear understanding of what demonism represents in the Holy Continent. It's not bad. It is terrible. In a faraway palace, a man with long jet-black hairs, violet eyes and a long pair of goat horns played with several beauties within a steamy, crimson pool when suddenly, his violet eyes shone with dazzling light. Oh! He let go of the beauties within his arms and glanced at his right arm where a purple flame-shaped mark glittered. What's the matter, Your Majesty? It seems the third child has finally awakened. The man leisurely said with an amused grin. Does Your Majesty want us to bring them back? No need. I'm curious to see who among them will find his way back first and in what shape or form. Ileana then proceeded by explaining the implications of demonism to Conrad. And indeed, it was much worse than he had anticipated. Perhaps it was naive of him to think that in a world with so many different races, one couldn't be facing too much hatred. But he was wrong. This was way worse than the Inquisition back on Earth. By decree of the Celestial Church, the feeblest suspicion of a relation to demons, no matter how shallow, was punished by family extermination. What was the meaning of excessive? This was the meaning of excessive. And if that was the fate of those merely suspected to consort with demons, Conrad failed to fathom what would be done to him, were they to ever figure out that he was for all intents and purposes of demonic blood. Yet, none of that really mattered at the moment. He strode toward Ileana and seized her waist. "What are you doing?" she complained while struggling to get out of his tight grasp. "I know I said dying by your side was fine, but I'm glad we didn't die. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to hold you like this," he said while gently stroking her hairs and keeping her face pressed against his chest. And for an instant, Ileana thought that insolent, unruly youth was no longer that hateful. Perhaps he even was a bit likable. Just a little bit, right? Time held its breath, allowing the pair to enjoy the fleeting moment for what seemed like an eternity. Conrad then freed her from his grasp, and although she let nothing transpire on her face, Ileana felt a small sense of loss swirl within her abdomen. "Let's get to proper business. I'm sure you must have an idea as to why they wanted to kill you, right? Maybe you even know some of them?" The inquiry pulled Ileana back to seriousness, and Conrad could see the shadow of sorrow hidden within her eyes. Following a brief silence, she sighed and stepped toward the three priestesses lying on the ground. "The dead males are head eunuchs, and those three women are among the holy consort's personal attendants." She then moved toward Freya and indexed her drowsy face while casting a perturbed gaze at Conrad. "As for her, she is Freya Stein, the daughter of Baron Nicholas Stein of the Golden-Eyed Lion race. She used to be a court lady working under the Holy Consort, but 30 years ago, she was married to Viscount Torsten Schneer by the Holy Emperor's decree. Court ladies were the superiors of the head palace maids and theoretically were not under the jurisdiction of any consort beside the Empress. However, many chose to join the different factions to pave a better future for themselves. Some of them were promoted head palace maids, but the majority came from noble families and entered the palace with the title. The House Stein was a feeble noble house, but Freya was a woman of high talent and incredible beauty, so her father sent her into the palace at a young age to serve the Holy Consort and weave connections. She didn't fail his expectations and managed to marry into the Uridal House Schneer, which greatly improved House Stein's status and brought them countless benefits. You may not understand the meaning of Uridal, so allow me to explain. Nobility titles may not be hereditary, but nobility is. There are two kinds of noble families. The Uridal that constitute the ancient nobility, noble houses with more than 10,000 years of history, and the Brifidel, noble houses with less than 10,000 years of history. Uridals wield enormous power and prestige within the Holy Flame Empire and can all trace their lineage back to a saint. Viscount Torsten Schneer is a 500 years old second-step transcendent knight with an army of more than 50,000 troops. He endured public criticism to divorce his previous wife and beg the emperor for an opportunity to marry Freya. That alone shows how much he loves her. But look at what you've done to her. Careful, I might think that you're actually worried about me. Who's worried about you? I'm just warning you in good faith. But she was indeed worried. That aside, I suppose the reason why they're targeting me is because of the Holy Consort's political games. Again with the Holy Consort. Although he had never met her, Conrad was starting to find that woman particularly annoying. Else, the Holy Consort is the country's #1 talent. She is less than 300 years old but has already broken through to the Holy Knight rank. But although she's the Emperor's favorite consort and admired as the Empire's #1 beauty, she's not satisfied. In the last decades, she's been amassing an increasing amount of political power, and already has a hand in many government institutions. She also gathered the support of many Brifidel houses. This has alarmed many powerful nobles who now attempt to thwart her influence. Among them is my father, Count Wolfgang Kracht. She paused, her eyes drifting into the past. The reason why my father sent me to the palace is not because of my illegitimate status. He was forced to do so by the emperor due to Elsa's intrigues. 10 years ago, as a warning to my father, she had me and my cousin sneak attacked by a ninth-step true priest. As a result, my spiritual cultivation was sealed while my cousin fell into a coma. In fact, was it not for me always hiding my spiritual cultivation, I would probably be in the same state. There was nothing more terrifying than a power-hungry woman. The level of cruelty they could reach often went far beyond men in the same positions. Thinking about it, that was only natural. After all, their rise was often more challenging and required an abundance of ruthless decisions early on. Who's the cousin you mentioned? Is she the one you needed the other high-grade true spirit restoration pill for? The reason why Conrad was confident in the cousin being as she was simple. Since she could be used to threaten Count Wolfgang, she was undoubtedly her paternal cousin and belonged to the Uradel housecraft. That being the case, it was impossible for her relatives to not have true spirit restoration pills at disposal. The only explanation was that just like Ileana, she had entered the palace. As for her status, Conrad recalled the rumor of Ileana being related to a consort. Her name is Daphne, an imperial consort and the daughter of one of my uncles. Although my father always doted a lot on us, he could not resist the emperor's decree to send us into the palace. Fortunately for me, my illegitimate birth allowed me to avoid the miserable fate of becoming a consort. Challenging the emperor's decree was treason. Oddly, a commoner committing treason would only get himself beheaded, while nobles caught doing so would drag their entire bloodline alongside them. This had something to do with commoners not possessing family names. And now that Conrad knew the full story, he couldn't help but pity those women caught in the crossfire of political games. It is necessary to give them a lot of penetrating love. What did you say? Nothing. He needed to stop that nasty habit of thinking out loud. Regardless, I do not think the holy consort is the one who sent them after you. Why is that? Ileana was puzzled. Who besides the holy consort could dispatch those ladies within the inner court? Freya was especially known to only obey Elsa's will. From what you've told me, the holy consort is callous but shrewd. You and your cousin are her political hostages. Meaning that as long as your father doesn't go beyond a certain limit, she will keep you alive. She can harm you, but she cannot kill you. Otherwise, she not only loses her advantage, but she also gains your father's unrestrained retaliation. It makes no bloody sense. Even if she wanted to kill one of the hostages to send a powerful message, she would first start with your coup. At that time, Conrad's eyes widened in realization. Not good. Quickly lead the way, your cousin is in danger. Only now did Ileana become aware of her own neglect. If she was being attacked, then wasn't it almost certain that her cousin also was? Without another word, she turned and shot toward Daphne's palace with Conrad right by her side. Meanwhile, at Daphne's palace, the only attendants left with her, servants carefully handpicked by Housecraft to assist and protect her, were now fighting tooth and nails with a group of masked assassins. But their resistance was coming to a brutal end. Just like the team sent to deal with Ileana, the assassins in Daphne's quarters were a combination of maids and eunuchs that either directly worked for the holy consort or belonged to her faction. They numbered 12 in total, with 10 high-level true knights and 2 grand knight court ladies. The reason for such a formidable lineup was Daphne's skilled entourage. Imperial consorts were allowed to possess 6 personal attendants that could be handpicked from their families, so Housecraft had chosen 6 loyal 9th-step true knight ladies to protect her. Those women all came from lesser houses subordinate to the Cracked. But unfortunately, they weren't able to detect the sneak attack carried on by Elsa's priest. Since then, they had dutifully taken care of the comatose Daphne. Little did they expect that after all those silent years, they would meet a full-blown assassination attempt. The 12 emerged from the shadows with no warning and immediately shot toward them. They fought hard to repel the assailants but were quickly suppressed and repelled by the Grand Knights leading them. Why? How young lady has already been comatose for more than a decade and did nothing to offend the holy consort, so why must you be so ruthless toward her? Roared one of the attendants with indignity. In the past, her relationship with Daphne was the best, and she always blamed herself for not having been able to protect her. But to her outrage, the Grand Knight pair burst into laughter. If you want to blame someone, blame Count Wolfgang for being unruly. He actually castrated his son to remove his succession rights and managed to obtain an imperial decree to not only legitimize that bastard daughter of his but also make her heir to his estates. Since he doesn't care about your lives, why should we? Count Wolfgang only had 2 children. His son Alex, born of his legal wife, and his daughter Ileana, born of his beloved concubine. While men were not allowed to have more than one wife, nobles held the right to possess concubines should they desire to. The higher their nobility title was, the more concubines they could have. But only rarely would they actually go through with it. The reason was simple. Their wives were no pushovers. To maintain the loftiness of their noble blood and forge alliances, noble males only married highborn ladies. Those ladies often came from houses on the same level and thus possessed significant backgrounds. Taking a concubine was not only an insult to them, but it was also an insult to their houses. More than one noble had been threatened with divorce for entertaining the thought of a concubine. Thus, only those mighty lords could genuinely afford to do so. At the peak of the transcendent knight rank, Wolfgang Kracht was one of the most powerful Urodel counts, but even he could not do such a thing without consequences. The day he brought in Ileana's mother was the day his wife left him to join the Holy Flame Church as a priestess. Since then, Alex had always resented him and sought to oppose him in any possible ways. Thus, when Elsa's agents approached him with the promise of helping him take over his father's estates before due time, he readily joined her faction. Not knowing that his father had been monitoring his every move and recording his misdeeds. But no one had expected that 3 days ago, Count Wolfgang would walk into court, kneel in front of the emperor and say, "I, Wolfgang Kracht, only have one daughter whom I love dearly. But for 2 decades she has been in your majesty's care, and I've not been able to see her ever since. Now my only wish is that your majesty grants me the right to legitimize her so that I can add her to the family registry. On account of all my contributions on the battlefield, I hope your majesty will agree." He was not only a powerful noble but also a mighty general with many contributions, and it was rumored that he would soon break through the semi-holy knight rank and be promoted to the position of margrave. Taking into consideration the fact that he had never asked for anything, the Holy Emperor granted his request, which caused Alex to fly into rage and vehemently curse his father in public. In retaliation, Count Wolfgang beat him into a bloody pulp and crushed his balls to the shock of all the present nobles. He then announced that his daughter would be his heir and return to his mansion. And it would seem that act caused the incensed holy consort to order the execution of Ileana and Daphne. How could this be? The attendant didn't believe that Count Wolfgang would go so far as to destroy his only male descendant. Wasn't that no different than proclaiming his will to challenge Else to the end? I also want to know why. But with that move, he made it clear that he cared not for your lives. That being the case, you can die. The court lady bellowed and shot toward the maid with her brandished sword. But at that time, "Halt!" A voice thundered from behind, and she stopped dead in her tracks. "Who?" And alongside the gathered individuals, she turned toward its origin and was surprised to see Ileana, who should on all account be dead, standing with a breathtakingly handsome black-haired youth by her side. "Yo, you really are an idiot. In the middle of your attack, someone says halt, and you actually stop?" said Conrad with a disappointed elder's tone. And immediately, black lines crept on all the gathered individuals' foreheads. "Kill them! Lady Ileana? Why are you here?" The attendants weren't relieved. On the contrary, their hearts were full of apprehension. With the present lineup, there was nothing Ileana alone could do to tip the scales. She could only follow them to the underworld. As for that pretty boy, he seemed to fit the too handsome to be reliable type. The 10 high-level true knights shot toward the duo at close to the speed of sound. But seeing their incoming forms, Conrad was unafraid. He extended his right hand and muttered, "Ecstasy clouds." Pink-colored clouds rose from his fingertips and shot toward the assailants. The eunuchs among them felt nothing, but the remaining 5 ladies immediately dropped limp onto the ground with their pupils dilated. The cloud then spread toward the Grand Knight court ladies, and they too soon collapsed in the very same fashion. What the hell is going on? Seeing their companions and leaders collapsing without any form of damage or resistance, the eunuchs were too shocked to carry on with their attacks. Meanwhile, Daphne's attendants were taken aback. "Ha ha ha ha." The downed women then began giggling and wriggling on the ground with their faces showcasing soaring euphoria, causing even more confusion within the gathered individuals. A wise man once said that there was nothing more dreadful than a woman's fury. I disagree. If there is anything in this world I will never dread, it is a woman's fury. Conrad complacently said, and caused Ileana's forehead to further crease. He then pounced onto the eunuchs at close to twice the speed of sound. bam bam asterisk bam 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 asterisk, and sent them crashing into the opposite walls with a violent series of punches.